I always say that the Korean prisoners were the first ones that were vilified by their own government. When they came home, we had 21 prisoners that stayed with the Chinese after the truce was signed. Eisenhower was the president. Of course, this is a retired five-star general, old Army, President of the United States, and he went ballistic when these 21 prisoners decided to stay with the Chinese. And then the term brainwashing came about, and this was a time when the height of the Cold War, the McCarthy era, they were afraid that all the PWs were brainwashed and were going to be good little obedient communists. I've been investigated by everybody you can think of, the FBI, the Counterintelligence Corps. I've seen my records that they had on that. I could have been a serial killer. They wouldn't have minded. What they wanted to know, was I a good, loyal American? But there's so many misconceptions about Korean PWs. A lot of it deals with a book, In Every War But One, by Eugene Kincaid. He made the claim that the that the American PWs didn't have any guts. That when they got sick or tired, they just lay down and died. I've been very close to dying many times. That's pretty hard to do. To just lay down and die, you can't do that. I've never seen it anyway. You have to be sick. You have to be weakened, and then you die. And in Korea, for instance, we were talking about the early PWs that the North Koreans had. And the average PW that the Koreans captured early in the war, they just killed. They didn't bother with them. The rest of them, they gathered them up in a group and they marched them north, especially as the American troops were pushing up into North Korea. And the officer that was in charge of these was very sadistic. Anybody that got sick, fell out, couldn't keep up the pace, they were shot. And there's a group of the prisoners, they call themselves Tiger Survivors. And they're very proud of having survived that. I would be too. When they got to a PW camp, they had 1,600 people die in 2 weeks. The death rate for American PWs in Korea was approximately 40%. That's the same death rate as prisoners of the Japanese in World War II, the Bataan Death March and all those atrocities. The winter of 1950 and 51 was terribly, terribly cold. And so these prisoners suffered greatly because they didn't have any warm clothes, they didn't have a warm place, they didn't have food, they didn't have medicine, they didn't have anything. And died like dogs in the process. And there's a poem that some prisoner wrote. Nobody knows who. So I assume that he died too. And I'd like to read it because it says everything that they went through in a few words. Not a bugle was heard, nor a funeral beat, not even a drum sounding the retreat. Over the ice, to the hill where the GIs are buried, 6 foot by 2 foot by 1 foot deep. In a Korean hill they sleep, young and old, all wondering why 1,600 had to die. No little white crosses with their name, but they are not buried in shame, although they lie in an unknown grave, 1,600 American brave. No useless caskets enclose their breast, GI clothing for their last rest. All colors of men, black, brown, and white, 1,600 faded lights. A pill, a powder, medicine of any kind, or should we say a stronger mind, could have saved them from yonder hill, 1,600 lying still. In their illness, tossing and turning, most of them knew there'd be no returning. Some went easy, some with pain. 1,600 died in vain. We go home to enjoy our fill. They are still there in that lonely hill. I talked to people on those burial details, and they didn't have any tools to dig those graves. They were using sticks and whatever they had. They would go up there and they'd dig a shallow little grave and dump the body in there. And if the body was too long for the hole, they broke the legs and folded them over. That's all they could do. They didn't, and then they'd pile rocks on them to try and keep the animals off. But the next day, somebody would be carrying those 4 guys up there and burying them. That's how fast they were dying. Well, you can imagine 1,600 people in 2 weeks. Fortunately, when I was captured in late April. And if I had been captured a few months earlier, I would have died. That's how close I came to it. And one of the things that killed many of the prisoners was amoebic dysentery. The ones that were captured in 1950 and 51 in the winter, many of them died of hypothermia and basically starvation, lack of medical care. There was absolutely no medical care. I had a friend that was captured at Chosin Reservoir. He was a medic and stayed with the wounded when the Marines retreated. He was Army. And the first thing when the Chinese took over those positions, they stripped all the winter uniforms off these guys. Even their boots, socks. If you couldn't get up and march, they left them there. They froze to death. The other ones, they marched about 20 miles barefoot. Well, they said some had socks. And over, these trails, and they ended up with frozen toes and feet and legs. And they said they were there, and so they had frostbite and gangrene and trench foot and everything else you can think of. And they said they had a quote-unquote humane Korean doctor came in and amputated all their toes and feet and legs with a rusty hacksaw blade. And they all died but 2.